Welcome. Today we're going to cover the fundamentals of cryptology, chapter 2. It's basically the history of cryptology. Let's take a look. We're going to be covering the history of cryptography, how it was used in the ancient world, modern, and some future areas that we're going to be looking at. So what is cryptology's purpose? It's basically just to safeguard information. We want to make sure that whatever we put in there, no one can read. It's keep it from falling into the wrong hands. Three basic elements we always want to be aware of when we're working with cryptography is we want to make sure it's confident. The three basic elements: confidentiality, integrity, and non-repudiation. Safeguard the data. The data is not altered, and it's positively identified on who sent it. So, what is cryptography? It's the science and practice of safeguarding information through special tools. We'll talk more. We discussed that a little bit last week with using algorithms, but it's not always that complicated. We want to keep the information secret. This was used back in the Egyptians, Greeks, Chinese, Romans, and it was used by many other civilizations. We use it during wartime. And today we use it in e-commerce, cell phones. Basically, cryptology dates back over 4,500 years. So we're going to look at some of that right now. The oldest that we found is 2000 BC, and it's the Egyptians, the hieroglyphics. This is just an example of what they put in that we were able to look at. It's just another example and what they had to use. Obviously, you had to know what the symbols meant in order to decrypt what was going on. One thing that they found was the Rosetta Stone. That enabled them to decrypt the hieroglyphics because the Rosetta Stone is written in many different languages. They understood one language, they were able to just use this stone to decipher some of the other languages. So this is a very important find when they found it, very important find in breaking the hieroglyphics of ancient civilizations. Atbash comes from the Hebrew language and the Bible. And basically, all it was flipping the alphabet backwards. If you look at the example, our alphabet starts with A, ends with Z. And what this did, it just reversed it, starts with Z, ends with A. So if you were using the letter D to write the plain text, the cipher text would start with a W. And that's all it was. So it was just flipping it backwards. Very simple, but if you didn't know it, it was difficult to read. And we get the Scytale. This is popular by the Spartans. And basically all this was a piece of leather, was written on a certain size wooden dowel. And then when you took the leather off that dowel, it didn't match up to anything. It would just be a string of letters. And so this allowed people, the Spartans, to code their messages, but having the right dowel allowed you to read it. Anyone can have access to it, but if you didn't know the dowel size and the message, it would never be able to figure out what was going on. The Caesar cipher was used by Julius Caesar. It was basically to protect military operations. As you can see in the example, all it did was shifting. You just had to know what it shifted to, how many letters, number of letters it would shift. So if you look at the example down here at the bottom, the plain, it starts with A. So as you see, the cipher D starts with it. So this was a shift of 3. It allowed you to shift. All you had to know was how many letters to shift, and that's where you'd start your alphabet from, and then you'd be able to decode it. So here's an example of the Caesar cipher.
The first well-known cipher, a substitution cipher, was used by Julius Caesar around 58 BC. It is now referred to as the Caesar cipher. Caesar shifted each letter in his military commands in order to make them appear meaningless should the enemy intercept it. Imagine Alice and Bob decided to communicate using the Caesar cipher. First, they would need to agree in advance on a shift to use, say 3. So to encrypt her message, Alice would need to apply a shift of 3 to each letter in her original message. So A becomes D, B becomes E, C becomes F, and so on. This unreadable or encrypted message is then sent to Bob openly. Then Bob simply subtracts the shift of 3 from each letter in order to read the original message. Incredibly, this basic cipher was used by military leaders for hundreds of years after Caesar.
I have fought and won, but I haven't conquered over man's spirit, which is indomitable.
However, a lock is only as strong as its weakest point. A lock breaker may look for mechanical flaws, or failing that, extract information in order to narrow down the correct combination. The process of lock breaking and code breaking are very similar. The weakness of the Caesar cipher was published 800 years later by an Arab mathematician named Al-Kindi. He broke the Caesar cipher by using a clue based on an important property of the language a message is written in. If you scan text from any book and count the frequency of each letter, you will find a fairly consistent pattern. For example, these are the letter frequencies of English. This can be thought of as a fingerprint of English. We leave this fingerprint when we communicate without realizing it. This clue is one of the most valuable tools for a code breaker. To break this cipher, they count up the frequencies of each letter in the encrypted text and check how far the fingerprint has shifted. For example, if H is the most popular letter in the encrypted message instead of E, then the shift was likely 3. So they reversed the shift in order to reveal the original message. This is called frequency analysis, and it was a blow to the security of the Caesar cipher.
So that was just a quick overview of how the Caesar cipher worked and how it was defeated. It's still used today if you don't have the time to go through everything. Polyalphabetic Cipher. It was created in 1452 by Leon Battista Alberti, and it's a substitution cipher. He's also known as the father of cryptology. But basically, if you look on the right, you can see you have the alphabet going across the top and the alphabet across the bottom. This gets us up to the 1800s. There really wasn't much up after the 1452, the veneer. There really wasn't much going on in cryptology. It wasn't until the Civil War that we started using it. And as you can see on the right, this one is a code that was used by the Confederates. And again, it was using the substitution. So all you had to do was know the code that you needed, and it allowed you to put it in. Now, the Confederates used a very simple substitution process, which the Union figured out really quick to break it. And so they were able to determine what was going on before the battles, and they were able to position men by breaking by breaking the Confederate thing, the Confederate code. Some modern examples, now we're up to the 1900s, World War I, World War II. World War I, we had the MI8 was created to break codes. And this allowed the code breakers to figure out what was going on. And again, we're able to intercept codes. But the US president at the time felt it wasn't fair that we were able to read other countries' messages. So they dismantled that after the war. However, during World War II, the Germans created probably one of the best known machines called the Enigma. And also the Japanese created their own version of it.
So this is one of the Enigma machines in the Science Museum's collection. But inside, it really looks just like a typewriter. It doesn't look that different to a normal typewriter. So each day, the German officer would have a code book that set the 3 codes for the rotors that you would start with. So the fact that the settings in the code book changed every single day made the Enigma machine incredibly difficult to break. So if we look inside, I can show you the rotors. You'll see this machine is a 3-rotor machine, and I can actually take those out. So each of the rotors has 26 different connectors. So you can transfer a letter that's come in from this end into a different letter here, and then it will pass through each of the other 2 rotors. So over 15,000 different settings that you can have for each letter that's come through. They did a lot of it originally by hand, but it was because of that understanding of the mathematics behind it that they were really able to, create an electromechanical machine that could break Enigma much more quickly. You really can't underestimate the amount that they did to shorten World War II. This is the reflector, so the signal would come through each of the 3 rotors and then actually be reflected from this side, sending the message back through the rotors again and giving another level of encryption. The signal then goes through to the lamp board here, and the letter would light up. So you can see that over here, a new encrypted letter would have come through, and that's the one that you then send using Morse code. If that wasn't enough, there's also another level of encryption that the Enigma machine could do. So there's also this plug board in the front. It would transpose letters. So according to which plugs you put in and which letters, you can actually just swap them over. So T might become U, or V would be W. And it adds another whole level of complexity to the encryption. The work that happened at Bletchley Park, I think there's still a very strong message there about working in teams, not giving up, keeping on going and thinking slightly outside the box. You don't always have to do things in the same way that people have done things before.
So that was just a quick overview of how the Enigma machine worked and the power to it, and how the code breakers from Britain actually figured out how to break the code, which was just as important. That, as she said, it definitely shortened the war. Ultra was the Allied forces that came together to break the German Enigma. It was done in Bletchley Park in the UK, and it was done with over 9,000 people. Many of you might have heard of Alan Turing. He's pretty much created the way computers should operate. And if you've never seen The Imitation Game, the movie, it is a good movie to watch. It goes through his life, about how he worked there and how he came about this breaking the code, and how now the Japanese had their own Enigma machine, if you want. It was not as robust, and it was broken again by the US prior to us starting the war. So we had a huge advantage knowing what was going to be going, where their ships were going, and gave us some nice information. Again, this is a picture of what that would look like. So between the 1970s and 1990s, that's when things started to become standardized. The data encryption standard was created, and it was pretty secure for about 20 years, 20, 30 years before it started, as computers were taking over, we were able to figure out more stuff. So advances, then we had the AES, which is the Advanced Encryption Standard, which is still used today, and the use of public keys. With the computer systems, keys could be sent public, but again, if you didn't know what they were, it was useless to it. And the future cryptology is quantum cryptography, and this now works with physics, has nothing to do with math. So this is when we're starting to get into where it might be possible not to break it at all. So this is something that we're coming up to. Cryptology has been around for over 4,000 years. I gotta fix that. And it has evolved dramatically. It's been used before computers by the Romans and Greeks and Chinese, and throughout history, using cryptography, it has helped reduce war, the length of the wars. So it's been a very useful tool to figure out what the enemies are doing. And it's only going to continue to get more secure as the world moves forward.